Hi, and welcome to TalkRx with Dr. Neha. I have a special guest today, Jahlel, and he is willing to ask his questions so that all of you can learn. And I'm always so impressed with brave souls willing to do this. So welcome, Jahlel.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I asked you to think of a question and come up with something that was stumping you. What'd you come up with?
Okay, well, it's not totally stumping me, but it's a question that deals with family.
Okay.
And my dad has a really strong personality and an incessant sense of humor. And my friends and I often joke that he missed his calling as a professional entertainer. Most of the time, it's really funny and fun to be around. People who are new to the conversation are often enamored, and he's such the conversationalist. Sometimes it feels like he talks over me and talks over other people.
Yep.
And I'm curious how I can broach that subject with him without hurting his feelings.
Yep.
He is really strong-willed and has that strong personality, but he's really sensitive to criticism. So often I don't say what I feel, I just sort of ride it out and let it play its course. But that was my question. How do I broach that subject with him without cutting off his energy that makes him who he is?
Yeah.
And without hurting his feelings?
So this is a great question, and in every family almost there seems to be that person, right? That person who's funny and charismatic and kind of makes family holidays amazing, right?
Yeah, that's definitely him.
Right, and so it's almost like without him, it's like we'd be 2D black and white, but with him it's like 3D HD color, and what you're saying is sometimes it feels like, whoa, like a little too much.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't stop, we're just like, oh, please, just a moment of silence, please.
So your dad sounds like an amazing man.
He is.
And I love your question because the first thing that I'm thinking of is really any weakness that comes across, because there's a way that I'm sure he wants to connect to you and connect to the people in the room. And what you're saying is there's this moment where it's too much and you don't feel heard, right? So the first thing to keep in mind is that any perceived weakness is actually just a strength overused, right?
Yeah, I don't perceive it as a weakness as much as maybe I feel like there's a lack of awareness sometimes where he doesn't realize that he's, where his opinion always seems to be the thing that has to come to the forefront, or if someone starts a story, then it's immediately, another story of his comes out instead of actually listening. Sometimes it feels like he doesn't listen as well, and I'm not sure why that annoys me sometimes, but maybe it's part to do with the father-son dynamic and the first son and having all those other, pressures that you have in a family. But it's just an interesting dynamic that I've noticed, and I notice that it makes me sort of shut down sometimes. I'm much more like my mom. I don't need to have that conversation going all the time. I don't mind that quiet time, and sometimes it makes me feel like I just pull back and disengage as opposed to really getting involved. So just a reflection on how I feel really when I'm in that situation. Not necessarily a total negative, but just a feeling like, why does that make me want to pull away, and how do I engage rather than just sort of shutting off and not being a part of that conversation.
Yeah. So this is a great question because I definitely think this plays out in many families, right? In yours in particular, tell me what the benefits of your dad's charisma and color has been in your life.
Well, he's always been a disciplinarian to a certain extent, and I appreciate that because he's never let me slip. It's always been, always taking the time to tell me why he's the way he is and why he's telling me what he is. And if he didn't love me, then he wouldn't tell me these things. I'm sure you've heard this before, right? So part of it is it's not necessarily my question, but sometimes it feels like the parenting won't ever stop.
Yeah.
It's like if I haven't
and
got
how
it
old
now,
are you?
I'm almost 40.
Almost 40, right?
But I appreciate that. I appreciate that thoughtfulness and that love and that. So I feel like I have a good understanding of where he's coming from.
Right.
And that keeps me pretty grounded in our relationship. We have a really good relationship, and it's open and it's it's all good.
Yeah.
But I just notice those aspects. So. That level of care and that love that you're just talking about, it's definitely, I know that's where he's coming from. And just knowing his upbringing, I feel like I have insights into what's made him the way he is. So I can appreciate that. I can sort of understand how he grew up and why he is the way he is. So
let's get to you.
Okay.
Okay. When is it that you are, you hold back when you should be speaking? Are there times that you do that? That you actually are experiencing something, but then you say, no, I'm not going to bring that up, or I'm not going to say anything because I'm not going to create waves, or so you divert, right? Because you don't seem to share that angle of your dad's experience. You enjoy it, and you're good kind of being more like your mom, like you said, which is like the you'll pull back and you'll kind of let someone else have center stage and enjoy it.
I don't feel like I need to be the center of attention, I guess.
Right.
So I'm comfortable with just being more on the sidelines, and when I think of it often, when I'm pulling back, it's because I've heard the story many times before,
Yeah.
and there seems to be like this almost regurgitation of it, like, oh, not this story again, you know. So,
Okay, but
so that's part of it, I guess. So I'm
So
getting
your part-
bored in the or I'm
that's
passing
with your dad.
right. Well, with
Right.
the topic or whatever we're talking about.
Great.
So I recognize that that's me. I have a story in my head as to what it means and where we're going with this conversation and what the punchline is. And that in some instances makes me kind of just go, okay, whatever, I'll just go, do something else or tap out of this, conversation, tune out.
Right. And so
But-
what about that moment, right, when you do need to speak up, and it might not be in the relationship with your dad, it might be somewhere else in your life. Are there times that you know you should speak up, but you don't?
I think those times, what comes to mind is recently I was living at home and helping with the family business.
Yep.
And there's certain things that you can say when you don't live in your parents' home.
So certain things who can say?
Certain things that I
can
can
say.
say, or a person who's living in their parents' home can say.
Right.
There's times to say certain things and times to be more reserved. And I think that
Choosing your battles?
yeah, and
Yeah.
not wanting to rock the boat when you can't get off the boat. So I would say that that's what comes to mind, in answer to that question. Is certainly there's times where I could just speak my mind, but I guess I feel like when I think about it, I'm thinking about 2 or 3, things that are going to happen after that, and having to deal with the repercussions of his emotions, and then how that's going to make our immediate dynamic. So to me, I don't feel like I'm holding back on it. I feel like I'm
managing
it,
outcome.
and I'm trying not to put myself in a situation where I feel like I have a feeling like where it's going to go if I really speak my mind.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, maybe you should find your own place, or maybe you should, while you're under my house.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
He's not too over the top like that, but he's certainly sensitive to it, and
Right.
I'm sensitive to not creating situations that I don't want to have to deal with necessarily. In the immediate. I don't think they're emotional, like real big issues between him and I necessarily.
Like, it's not an emotional landmine.
No, but it's
just a little bit of discomfort. You're speaking about the everyday dynamics in families,
yeah.
right? And this place that I'm sure many people can resonate with, right? So this is the deal, right? Your father is this amazing, colorful, charismatic man, and he shows up in the world as that. There are times that it kind of rubs up against you, and what it's rubbing up against that I'm hearing is how he takes responsibility for himself. And then if people are going to give him feedback or not, it's his job to manage that. What you're doing is, not only are you managing yourself, you're trying to manage everybody else's 3 steps down. If I say this is what they're going to do, and this is what this is going to happen. Do you see how you're not just taking care of yourself? You're actually using how other people might respond as a reason why you don't show up as who you are. Do you understand that?
I do understand that, and I feel like our relationship is a lot better from 1,000 miles away. So when I visit, or if I'm there for a short period of time, then I'm much more. I speak my mind much more, and I'm much more. We don't have a problem as far as that goes. I'm much more ready to just wear it on my sleeve and to say it.
Yeah.
But in recent situations, it's been more like where I've been living there, so it's been like in really close quarters.
Yep.
But I hear what you're saying as far as trying to manage other people's, what's going to happen after this or that. It's instead of just like being responsible for yourself. So point taken there.
Awesome. And so when you do that, right, what it's going to require is self-trust. It's going to require that when you have a conversation that you feel confident enough. So let's say you're your dad and I'm you, right? And so I have to be confident enough to say And, hey, Dad, there's something I wanted to talk to you about yesterday at dinner. I noticed when I left, I left a little bit early, and normally we stay, and whatever it is, right? You're going to tell him something changed, and you always want to make sure it's a good time for him, okay?
Right.
Before you, especially because you know how important it is to him.
Yeah.
And then what you're going to say is, "Hey, Dad, I know that I'm showing up in our relationship. I want to show up better here. And I noticed I shut down and left yesterday, and I didn't speak to you. And what I know is that I know how much you love me and how much you care, and that's why you put all this energy forth. And I noticed that sometimes I disconnect. And the reason I think I do that is because I feel I wasn't feeling heard. When I said, I wanted blue on the walls for the office, I didn't hear you acknowledge it. I was waiting, for you to tell me, I put a lot of thought into it. And I think there was a part of me that became a little boy again. And I was waiting for you to tell me it was a good idea.
Right.
But you brushed right over it and went to something else. And I noticed I just felt hurt and disappointed. And so I left early. And so that's where pronouns become very important that we talked about in the beginning. When you're speaking to your father and you're saying in the past, you notice that it has been hard to have that conversation, pay attention to what pronouns you're using. Because if I say this, you don't ever listen to me. And you know what? When I try to tell you things, you're not hearing. And you told me that story 5 times. Do you see how it's a very different?
I think that we'd both be guilty of that, and I feel like I'm open enough to acknowledge that I am sometimes guilty of that.
Yeah.
And I would say that he is probably often guilty of that as well. So
Right.
putting those two things together, I could see how you can have that communication gap. But
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me any takeaways. What were your takeaways?
Well, just to focus on myself more, I guess, and to come at it from a position of me as opposed to what someone else is doing to me.
And what might happen if you show up as you?
Right.
So that's where you just shift into self-trust and you say, I'll stay curious and I can handle what comes next.
Yeah, that's a good takeaway. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So if any of you know that sometimes you're really looking forward to seeing everyone for the holidays, but sometimes when you get there, it's a little bit different than you expected, you're going to appreciate what Jahlel is going through. Also, there's a couple other points I want to make sure we cover, which is there was something beautiful that Jahlel said around knowing your relationship with your family members and exactly what distance is the right amount of distance in your relationship, whether it be physical distance, living in someone's home, or living 3,000 miles away, or 1,000 miles, or 500 miles, whatever it is. Pay attention to what distance you might need to create in your relationships that can help you create the type of relationship that you want. So here's to improving our relationships with family, knowing who we are, right? Who am I? How I show up and whether I get triggered or not, and trusting myself enough to show up as who I am, use the right pronouns, and be curious about the other person and how I can connect better to them. So if you have some thoughts on this, drop me a tweet at #AskDrNeha, and I look forward to answering your questions in the future. Thank you.